that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. In all that time, they had never lost a single war. They had never retreated from a single battle. They had never felt fear. Their empire stretched across 17 star systems, and every species they encountered learned the same lesson: bow down or be destroyed. High Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Blade. He watched through the massive viewport as another civilization surrendered before his fleet. The planet below was called Four, home to a peaceful species of six-limbed creatures who had made the mistake of refusing the first ultimatum. Now their cities burned, and their leaders begged for mercy on their knees. Felt nothing. This was how the universe worked. The strong conquered, the weak submitted. It had always been this way, and it would always be this way. They were perfect conquerors. They stood 8 feet tall with bodies covered in natural armor. Their 4 arms ended in claws that could tear through metal. Their eyes saw in spectrums that other species could not imagine. They had evolved on a death world where everything tried to kill everything else, and they had emerged as the ultimate predators. In 3,000 years, they had encountered 47 intelligent species. 39 had surrendered immediately. 8 had tried to fight. Those 8 no longer existed. Turned away from the viewport and addressed his second in command. Send the standard occupation forces. I want this world integrated into the Dominion within 1 cycle. Commander bowed her head in acknowledgement. She was young by standards, barely 400 years old, but she had proven herself in dozens of campaigns. It shall be done, High Commander. The scouts have also returned with a new report. Another species. Yes, on the outer rim of an unremarkable spiral arm. They call themselves humans. Had heard this story countless times before. A new species discovered. A new world to conquer. A new population to enslave. He gestured for to continue. They are soft creatures, said with barely hidden amusement. No natural armor, no claws. They live barely a century before dying of old age. Their home world is temperate and mild. They have only recently developed faster than light travel. How recently? Less than 200 years. Almost laughed. They had possessed interstellar travel for 20,000 years. These humans were infants stumbling in the dark. What is their military capacity? Pulled up the scout reports on the holographic display. Images of human ships appeared, small and fragile-looking compared to warships. Primitive. Their weapons are based on kinetic projectiles and simple energy beams. Their ships have minimal armor. Their largest vessel is 1/10 the size of this flagship. And their population? Approximately 12 billion on their home world. Another 3 billion spread across nearby colonies. 15 billion slaves for the Dominion. That was a useful number. They always needed more workers for their mines and factories. These humans would serve well enough. Prepare a standard subjugation fleet, ordered. 1 battle group should be sufficient. I want this completed quickly. We have more important matters to attend to. The Dominion Council approved the conquest 3 days later. They did not even bother to hold a formal vote. Conquering a primitive species barely warranted their attention. They assigned the task to a mid-level commander named and authorized 17 warships for the operation. Commander was eager to prove himself. He had served under for centuries and dreamed of one day commanding his own sector of the empire. This would be an easy victory to add to his record. He gathered his forces and set course for the human home world. The journey took 12 days through hyperspace. During that time, studied everything the scouts had gathered about humans. He found them fascinating in a morbid sort of way. They were so fragile, so weak, so obviously unfit for survival in a hostile universe. And yet they had somehow developed technology. They had built cities and ships and even ventured out into space. Wondered how they had survived long enough to achieve anything at all. Their world had predators, diseases, natural disasters. By all logic, they should have gone extinct millions of years ago. Instead, they had and spread like a virus. Perhaps that was their only skill, thought, breeding. They would make useful slaves if nothing else. When his fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the human home world, expected panic. He expected the primitive creatures to flee in terror at the sight of 17 warships. He expected immediate surrender. What he got was something else entirely. Within minutes of his arrival, human ships began appearing from behind the planet and its moon. They were small and crude, but there were dozens of them. They did not flee. They did not hide. They formed a defensive formation between his fleet and their world. Was amused. These creatures actually intended to fight. How adorable. He broadcast the standard ultimatum. Surrender within 72 hours or face complete annihilation. The message was translated into the human language and transmitted on all frequencies. Then he waited. The response came in less than 1 hour. It was not surrender. It was not negotiation. It was a single phrase repeated over and over. Come and take it. Did not understand. He ordered his communications officer to verify the translation. The officer confirmed it was accurate. The humans were refusing to surrender. They were daring to attack. This had never happened before. In 3,000 years, no species had ever responded to the ultimatum with defiance. Even the warlike had recognized the futility of resistance. Even the proud had chosen slavery over extinction. But these humans, these soft, fragile creatures with their tiny ships and primitive weapons, were telling them to come and fight. Felt something strange stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it because he had never felt it before. It was not fear. They did not know fear. It was something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or anticipation. These humans would die, of course. That was certain. But for the first time in centuries, found himself actually looking forward to a battle. He gave the order to advance. Across the void, on the bridge of the human vessel Relentless, Captain Daniel watched the alien fleet begin to move. He was 43 years old. He had served in the United Earth Defense Force for 20 years. He had fought in the Mars Uprising and the Belt Wars. He had seen friends die and enemies fall. But he had never faced anything like this. The alien ships were enormous. Each one dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Their weapons were beyond anything human science could explain. By every logical measure, this was a fight humanity could not win. Daniel smiled. All ships, he said into his communicator. This is Captain. We are about to face the greatest threat our species has ever known. These aliens have conquered the galaxy. They have never been defeated. They think we are weak. They think we will break. He paused, looking at the faces of his crew. Young men and women who had volunteered to stand between Earth and destruction. Let us show them what humans do when our backs are against the wall. The first battle of the human war was about to begin. The fleet moved toward Earth like a slow tide of death. Commander had expected the human ships to scatter at their approach. Instead, the small vessels held their formation and waited. Captain Daniel gripped the arms of his command chair as the distance between the two fleets closed. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy, called out the numbers in a steady voice. 200,000 kilometers, 150,000, 100,000. They are powering weapons, Amy reported. Energy readings off the scale. Daniel nodded. He had known this moment would come. The alien ships were about to fire and there was nothing he could do to stop them. Human shields could not withstand weapons. Human armor would melt like paper, but running was not an option. Behind his fleet lay Earth and every person Daniel had ever loved. All ships execute scatter pattern Omega on my mark, he ordered. Mark. The human fleet exploded into motion. Ships that had been flying in tight formation suddenly broke apart in every direction. They spun and rolled and dove in patterns that seemed almost random. The fired. Massive beams of energy cut through space where the human ships had been moments before. Several beams found their targets, and Daniel watched 3 human vessels disappear in balls of fire, but most of the shots missed. Stared at his tactical display in confusion. The human ships were moving in ways that made no sense. They were not following any formation he recognized. They were not coordinating their movements in any logical pattern. They were flying like chaos itself. "What are they doing?" he demanded. His tactical officer had no answer. They had fought many species, but all of them had used predictable military tactics, lines and formations, coordinated strikes, logical maneuvers. These humans were flying like insects, darting and weaving without any apparent strategy. And then the humans fired back. Their weapons were primitive compared to technology, simple kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams, but they came from every direction at once. Hundreds of small ships attacking from hundreds of different angles. The shields were designed to block concentrated fire from a single direction. They were not designed for this. The Relentless swooped in close to a destroyer, so close that thought the human captain had lost his mind. At that range, a single shot would vaporize the tiny ship, but the human vessel fired a spread of missiles directly into the destroyer's engine section before pulling away at impossible speed. The destroyer exploded. Felt his heart stop. A warship had been destroyed, by humans, by these soft, fragile, pathetic creatures. It was impossible, it was unthinkable. "All ships concentrate fire on the lead human vessel," he commanded. "Destroy it immediately." 17 warships turned their weapons toward the Relentless. Daniel saw the energy reading spike and knew what was coming. There was no way to dodge this much firepower, no way to survive. "It has been an honor," he said quietly to his crew. But before they could fire, something unexpected happened. A small human ship, barely larger than a shuttle, flew directly into the path of the weapons. The pilot, a young woman named Lisa Park, had calculated the exact trajectory needed to intercept the concentrated fire. Her ship took the full force of 17 warships. It vaporized instantly. But in that moment, the Relentless escaped. On the bridge of the Eternal Blade, watching from a safe distance, High Commander saw everything. He saw the small human ship sacrifice itself without hesitation. He saw the chaos of the battle. He saw a destroyer reduced to debris. "What manner of creatures are these?" he whispered. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the humans had lost 47 ships and over 2,000 lives. They had lost 3 destroyers and 1 cruiser. By any normal measure, it was a victory. But did not feel victorious. He had come expecting an easy conquest. He had lost 4 warships to a species that should not have been able to scratch his paint. His remaining vessels were damaged. His warriors were shaken. He gave the order to land ground forces. If the humans would not surrender their world from orbit, they would take it by force. Troop transports descended toward the largest human city, a place called Chicago. On the ground, Sergeant Brooks watched the alien ships descend. She was 31 years old, a veteran of the 101st Airborne Division. She had fought in 3 wars and killed more enemies than she could count, but she had never faced anything like this. The landing craft touched down in Grant Park, crushing trees and monuments beneath their massive weight. Doors opened, and the alien warriors emerged. Had seen the intelligence reports. She knew they were 8 feet tall. She knew they had 4 arms and armored skin. She knew they were stronger and faster than any human. But seeing them in person was different. They were monsters, nightmares made flesh. Each one looked capable of tearing a tank apart with its bare hands. The commander stepped forward and broadcast a message in broken English. "Surrender now. Resistance means death. You cannot defeat us." Looked at the soldiers around her. Young men and women with rifles and grenades. They were terrified. She could see it in their eyes, but they did not run. She raised her radio and spoke to the scattered units hidden throughout the city. "All teams, this is Brooks. Remember the plan. We do not fight them head-on. We hit and run. We make them bleed for every block. We make this city their grave." They expected the humans to charge. That was how inferior species always reacted. A desperate final attack before the inevitable surrender. Instead, the streets remained empty. The buildings remained silent. The commander ordered his forces to advance. They made it 3 blocks before the first bomb exploded. Had spent the last 2 days preparing Chicago for this moment. Every building was a trap. Every street was a kill zone. Every shadow held a soldier with a rifle and a grudge. The warriors were strong. Their armor could stop most bullets. Their claws could cut through concrete. But they could not fight an enemy they could not see. They could not defend against attacks that came from everywhere at once. Sergeant Marshall led his team through the subway tunnels beneath the alien formation. They emerged behind the lines and opened fire before disappearing back underground. Private Reed rigged an entire apartment building to collapse on top of an advancing column. Corporal led alien warriors into a maze of narrow alleys where their size became a disadvantage. By nightfall, they had advanced only 12 blocks. They had lost over 300 warriors. They had not captured a single human. Commander looked at the casualty reports and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was not how wars were supposed to go. They were supposed to win easily. They were supposed to crush all resistance within hours. Instead, they were bleeding, dying, losing. He requested reinforcements from High Commander. On the Eternal Blade read the request with growing unease. Something was very wrong. These humans should have surrendered days ago. They should have been broken by the mere sight of warriors. Instead, they were fighting with a ferocity that all logic. He approved the reinforcements, but for the first time in his long life, wondered if this war might not be as easy as he had assumed. Far below, in the ruins of Chicago, Sergeant Brooks cleaned her rifle and prepared for another night of hunting. The aliens were big and strong and scary, but they died just like everything else. And Brooks was very good at making things die. 3 months into the war, they had learned a terrible truth. Humans did not fight like any species they had ever encountered. Humans fought like demons. High Commander sat in his war room surrounded by holographic displays showing casualty reports from across the human home world. The numbers were staggering. In 90 days, they had lost more soldiers than in the previous 5 centuries of conquest. Their forces controlled less than 8% of the planet's surface. Every city was a fortress. Every forest was an ambush. Every human was a potential enemy. "Explain this to me," demanded of his advisors. "How are we losing to creatures made of meat and water?" None of them had an answer. They had always won through superior strength and technology. They would land overwhelming forces, crush any resistance, and accept surrender. It was simple. It was efficient. It had worked for 3,000 years. But humans refused to follow the script. In the city formerly known as Tokyo, forces had declared victory after capturing the government district. The next morning, they woke to find half their officers dead in their beds. Human assassins had infiltrated their camp in the darkness, killing silently with blades and wire before vanishing like smoke. In the forests of Siberia, an entire battalion disappeared without a trace. Search parties found only frozen bodies and strange symbols carved into trees. The human resistance fighters called themselves partisans, and they had been fighting invaders in these woods for centuries. In the mountains of Afghanistan, they learned why so many empires throughout human history had failed to conquer this land. The humans there did not even use advanced weapons. They used explosive traps, rock slides, and patience. They could wait for days without moving, then strike with devastating precision. Commander Price had become a legend among both humans and he led a special operations unit that seemed to appear everywhere at once. They destroyed supply lines, rescued prisoners, and assassinated commanders. The had put a massive bounty on his head, but no one could catch him. Was a Navy SEAL, trained in the most brutal methods of warfare humanity had ever devised. He had spent 20 years learning how to kill efficiently and disappear completely. Now, he was teaching those skills to anyone willing to fight. His latest operation had targeted a communication hub in what used to be Berlin. His team of 12 had infiltrated the facility at night, disabled the guards without a single shot, planted explosives throughout the structure, and escaped before anyone noticed. The explosion took out not just the hub but an entire command staff that had been meeting inside. When they reviewed security footage afterward, they found nothing, and his team had avoided every camera, every sensor, every patrol. They had moved through the facility like ghosts. Dr. Carter was not a soldier. He was a who had been captured during the initial invasion. They had taken him for interrogation, wanting to understand human biology and potential weaknesses. Spent 4 months in captivity. He answered their questions with half-truths and misdirection. He told them humans were fragile and weak. He confirmed every assumption they already had, and all the while he watched and listened and learned. He discovered that society was not as unified as it appeared. The warrior caste looked down on the scientists. The scientists resented the administrators. The administrators feared the commanders. Everyone despised the subject races that served the empire. They ruled through fear, even among themselves. When finally escaped, killing 3 guards with a medical tool he had stolen from the interrogation room, he brought back intelligence that would change everything. General Brooks read his report with growing excitement. She was no longer the sergeant who had defended Chicago. 3 months of brutal urban warfare had earned her promotion after promotion as superior officers died, and she remained standing. Now she commanded the entire North American resistance. "They are not invincible," she told her officers. "They have conquered through fear because no one has ever stood up to them. Their subject races are slaves who would rebel if given the chance. Their empire is held together by intimidation, not loyalty." She began planning something that no human military had ever attempted. They would not just defend Earth. They would take the war to the stars. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Torres was making a different kind of history. She was a fighter pilot, one of the best humanity had ever produced. She had shot down 17 craft in the first month of the war, earning the nickname Angel of Death among the resistance. Her most famous moment came during the Battle of Singapore. Her fighter had been damaged, engines failing, weapons depleted. A carrier was launching bombers toward refugee evacuation ships. Thousands of civilians would die if those bombers reached their targets. Made a choice. She aimed her crippled fighter at the carrier's hangar bay and accelerated to maximum speed. At the last possible moment, she ejected, her seat rocketing away as her ship plowed into the alien vessel. The explosion was massive. Secondary detonations ripped through the carrier as fuel and ammunition ignited. The bombers never launched. The refugees escaped. Was captured 2 days later, her ejection seat having landed in controlled territory. They put her in their most secure prison facility. She escaped within 6 hours. No one knew exactly how she did it. They found 11 dead guards and a hole in the wall that should have been impossible to make. Reappeared at a resistance base 3 weeks later, thin and but very much alive. When asked how she had escaped, she simply smiled and said, "They underestimated me." They were learning that underestimating humans was a fatal mistake. Their scientists had begun studying captured human bodies, trying to understand how such weak creatures could be so dangerous. What they found horrified them. Humans could survive injuries that would kill any other species. Their bodies produced chemicals that allowed them to ignore pain and continue fighting long after they should have collapsed. They could heal wounds that would be permanently crippling to warriors. They adapted to poisons. They survived in extreme temperatures. They required less food and water than any comparable life form. And their brains were terrifying. Humans could plan complex operations while simultaneously reacting to unexpected changes. They could predict enemy behavior with uncanny accuracy. They learned from every encounter, adapting their tactics faster than any species that had ever fought. Worst of all, humans seemed to become more dangerous when pushed to the edge. Other species broke under pressure. They surrendered. They gave up hope. Humans did the opposite. When cornered, when outnumbered, when facing certain death, humans became creative in ways that logical analysis. High Commander received a new report every day detailing some impossible human achievement. A single soldier holding a bridge against 50 warriors. A civilian with no training disabling a tank with improvised explosives. Children passing messages and supplies through lines that adult infiltrators could not penetrate. He began to have nightmares. For the first time in his long life, dreamed of defeat. On Earth, humanity was not just surviving, it was preparing. Admiral Christopher Hayes had been building a fleet in secret, hidden in the asteroid belt beyond Mars. Ships constructed from salvaged technology and human innovation. Crews trained in new tactics developed from 3 months of desperate warfare. The time was coming to stop defending and start attacking. The humans were going to war. 6 months after the invasion began, Admiral Christopher Hayes led the newly formed Earth Defense Fleet out of hiding. 47 warships emerged from the asteroid belt and set course for Saturn. The largest staging area in the solar system orbited the ringed planet. Hayes was 62 years old, a career naval officer who had spent his entire life preparing for a war he never expected to fight. He had studied every naval battle in human history, from ancient triremes to modern spacecraft. He understood one truth above all others: victory belonged to whoever controlled the terrain. Space had no terrain, but Saturn's rings did. The commander at Saturn, Sub-Commander, detected the approaching human fleet with plenty of warning. He had over 90 warships under his command, each one larger and more powerful than anything the humans possessed. He was not worried. Deployed his fleet in standard formation, creating an impenetrable wall of firepower between the humans and his orbital stations. It was the same tactic they had used for thousands of years: overwhelming force, direct confrontation, inevitable victory. Hayes did not attack the formation. Instead, he led his fleet directly into Saturn's rings. Hesitated. The rings were dangerous. Billions of ice chunks and rocks ranging from tiny pebbles to objects the size of mountains. Navigation was difficult. Sensors were unreliable. It was madness to fight there. But the humans were heading for the rings anyway. If wanted to destroy them, he would have to follow. He gave the order to pursue. The moment the fleet entered the rings, everything changed. Their large ships became liabilities, too slow to avoid collisions and too big to maneuver effectively. Their advanced sensors were confused by the constant electromagnetic interference from Saturn itself. Their rigid formations broke apart as captains tried to navigate through the debris. The human ships, smaller and more agile, wove through the ice and rock like they had been born there. They had trained for this battle in simulators for months, learning every path through the chaos. Now they used that knowledge to devastating effect. Lieutenant Commander led a squadron of fast attack craft on a flanking maneuver that brought them behind the fleet. They targeted engine sections and weapon systems, crippling warships without destroying them. Disabled vessels became obstacles that further disrupted the formation. Captain Sandra Wells commanded the heavy cruiser Victory, the largest ship in the human fleet. She positioned her vessel behind a massive ice chunk and waited for the flagship to pass. When it did, she unloaded everything she had into its unshielded rear. The flagship survived, but barely. Sub-Commander found himself commanding a battle from a ship that could barely move. By the time they extracted themselves from the rings, they had lost 34 warships. The humans had lost 11. It was the first major naval victory in human history against an alien force. On Earth, news of the Battle of Saturn spread like wildfire. For the first time since the invasion began, people believed they might actually win this war. President Laura Mitchell had aged a decade in 6 months. She had watched cities burn and millions die. She had made decisions that sent young men and women to certain death. But she had not broken. Now she stood before the United Nations and announced the next phase of the war. "We will not wait for them to come to us," she declared. "We will take this fight to their empire. We will show them and every other species in this galaxy that humanity will not be conquered." Operation Phoenix was the most ambitious military undertaking in human history. Human agents would infiltrate the Dominion and contact the enslaved species that served the Empire. They would offer something they never had: alliance. Dr. Carter volunteered to lead the diplomatic mission. He had learned the language during his captivity. He understood their society. He knew which species might be willing to rebel. His first target was a silicon-based species that they had conquered over 2,000 years ago. They were forced to work in the Empire's mining operations, extracting precious metals from asteroids and moons. They hated their masters with a cold, patient fury. Traveled on a captured transport ship, modified with human technology and crewed by volunteers who knew they might never return. It took them 3 weeks to reach space, slipping past patrol fleets and sensor networks. When he finally stood before the Resistance Council, made his case simply: "They are not invincible. We have proven that. Help us defeat them and your people will be free." The leader, a massive crystalline being named Shard of Dawn, studied the human with curiosity. "Many species have promised to free us. All have failed." "We are not like other species," replied. "We do not know how to give up." Shard of Dawn was silent for a long moment. Then something that might have been a smile crossed its geometric face. "We have watched your war with interest. You are strange creatures, weak in body but strong in other ways. Perhaps you are different after all." They agreed to ally with humanity. It was the first crack in the Empire. Over the following months, more cracks appeared. A telepathic species enslaved for their abilities began feeding false information to their masters. The scattered remnants of the obelisk builders emerged from hiding with ancient weapons that could threaten even warships. Slave revolts erupted on a dozen worlds. High Commander watched his empire begin to crumble. The humans had done something no other species had ever accomplished. They had given the conquered peoples of the galaxy hope. He summoned every available warship to Earth. If he could crush humanity quickly and decisively, the rebellions might still be contained. The subject races would learn once again to fear their masters. Order would be restored. His combined fleet numbered over 300 warships. It was the largest armada ever assembled. Surely, this would be enough to end the human threat once and for all. Admiral Hayes watched the approaching fleet from his position near Mars. His own forces had grown, but they were still outnumbered 3-1. Direct confrontation would be suicide. But Hayes had no intention of fighting fair. "Signal to all commands," he ordered. "Execute Operation Nemesis." Across the solar system, human forces began to move, not toward the fleet but around it, behind it, above and below it. Hayes had spent months positioning ships and stations in locations they would never expect. The final battle for Earth would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. General Brooks stood on the surface of the moon, looking up at the stars where she knew the enemy fleet approached. Beside her stood representatives of and a dozen other species that had joined the fight. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "the universe will never be the same." Shard of Dawn's crystalline form glinted in the "No, it will not, but perhaps that is a good thing." Smiled grimly. I guess we will find out. Battle of Earth began at dawn on July 4th, exactly 1 year after the first ships had appeared in human space. Admiral Christopher Hayes had chosen the date deliberately. If humanity was going to fight for its survival, it would do so on the anniversary of its first great revolution. High Commander led his fleet personally, commanding from the bridge of the newly repaired Eternal Blade. 312 warships advanced toward the human home world. It was the most powerful force ever assembled in the history of the Dominion. Nothing could stand against it. Hayes had 53 ships, but he also had something they did not expect. The first surprise came from the asteroid belt. Automated weapons platforms that humans had been building in secret for months opened fire on the flanks. The platforms were crude, little more than engines attached to massive guns, but they were numerous, and they created chaos. The second surprise came from Earth itself. The planet's orbital defenses had been rebuilt and strengthened during the occupation. Surface-to-space missiles launched by the thousands, overwhelming point defense systems through sheer volume. The third surprise came from behind. A fleet of Allied ships and an obelisk builder emerged from hyperspace at the rear. They had been waiting at the edge of the solar system for exactly this moment. Found himself fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously. His numerical advantage meant nothing when his forces were scattered and confused. The ordered formations that had won 1,000 battles dissolved into chaos. Captain Sandra Wells led her squadron directly at the Eternal Blade. Her ship, the Victory, had been upgraded with captured weapons and armor plating. It was the most powerful vessel humanity had ever built, and she intended to use it. The Eternal Blade was still larger, still more powerful, but Wells did not need to destroy it. She just needed to keep it busy. While the Victory engaged the flagship, Lieutenant Commander led a strike team in boarding pods toward the Eternal Blade's hull. They cut through the armor plating with shaped charges and fought their way inside. Hand-to-hand combat with warriors was brutal and bloody. The aliens were stronger and faster, their natural armor deflecting most projectile weapons. But the humans had trained for this. They used explosives, flame weapons, and close-quarters tactics that turned the ship's narrow corridors into death traps. Commander Price led the assault personally. He had waited a year for this moment, fought through impossible odds to reach it. Now he was inside the enemy flagship, and nothing was going to stop him. His target was the bridge. The fighting lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the fleet was shattered. Half their ships had been destroyed. Another quarter had surrendered or fled. The rest were too damaged to continue fighting. On the bridge of the Eternal Blade, Price stood over the defeated form of High Commander. The leader had fought well, killing 4 of his team before finally being brought down. But even the greatest warrior in the Dominion could not defeat a species that simply refused to quit. "Why?" asked, purple blood leaking from his wounds. "Why did you not surrender? You should have died. Every logical analysis said you would lose." Considered the question. He thought about all the friends he had buried over the past year, all the cities that had burned, all the sacrifices that had been made. "Because humans do not know how to give up," he said finally. "It is not in our nature. You can beat us down, you can hurt us. You can kill us, but you will never break us. We have been fighting for our survival since the day we evolved. It is what we do." Closed his eyes. For the first time in 3,000 years, he truly understood fear. The Dominion collapsed over the following 18 months. Without their fleet to enforce order, the subject races rose up everywhere. They reclaimed their home worlds. They used their telepathy to coordinate resistance movements across 100 systems. The obelisk builders revealed hidden fleets that had been waiting for this moment. Humanity led the alliance, not because they demanded to, but because the other species asked them to. These strange, soft creatures from a backwater planet had done what no one else could. They had broken the chains of an empire. The Galactic Accord was signed on Earth. In Geneva, representatives from 37 species gathered to create something new, a federation based on cooperation rather than conquest, an alliance where strength was used to protect rather than dominate. General Brooks attended the ceremony as the military representative of humanity. She stood next to Shard of Dawn, now speaking for a free nation. Behind them were delegates from species that had been enemies a year ago and were now friends. "Your people are frightening," Shard of Dawn told her quietly, "but also inspiring. You showed us that fear is a choice, that even the weakest can become strong if they refuse to surrender." Thought about all the soldiers she had lost, all the friends who would never see this day. We paid a heavy price for that lesson. All valuable things have heavy prices. The question is whether the price is worth paying. The crystalline being gestured at the gathered delegates. "Look at what your people have built. A galaxy united. The end of 3,000 years of tyranny. Freedom for trillions of beings who had given up hope." Nodded slowly. "When you put it that way, I suppose it was worth it." High Commander was tried for war crimes and sentenced to spend the rest of his long life helping rebuild the worlds his empire had destroyed. Some thought the punishment too lenient. Others thought it fitting that the greatest conqueror in galactic history would end his days planting gardens and teaching children. Admiral Christopher Hayes retired to a small house on the shore of Lake Michigan. He spent his days fishing and reading history, though he was called back to service twice more when new threats emerged. He always came back. Dr. Carter became the first human ambassador to the former Dominion worlds. He spent 20 years traveling from system to system, building bridges between species that had never known anything but fear and hatred. Lieutenant Torres commanded the first exploration fleet to venture beyond the former Dominion borders. She discovered 17 new species and helped 2 of them achieve faster-than-light travel. When she finally retired, she had become the most decorated officer in human history. And Commander Price, he disappeared 3 years after the war. Some said he had gone to explore the unknown regions of the galaxy. Others said he had simply found a quiet place to rest after a lifetime of fighting. His final message was a single sentence transmitted to General Brooks. "My war is over. Take care of our people." She did. Humanity spread across the stars, building and exploring and growing. They made mistakes along the way. They had conflicts and disagreements and sometimes made things worse before making them better. They were not perfect. But they were survivors. They had faced the greatest military power the galaxy had ever known and refused to kneel. They had united species that had hated each other for. They had changed everything. 1,000 years later, historians would debate exactly how a small species from an unremarkable planet had managed to reshape galactic civilization. They would write books and create documentaries and argue endlessly about the key factors. But the survivors of the war, both human and alien, knew the truth. Humans had won because giving up was simply not something they could do. It was hardwired into their DNA, burned into their culture, fundamental to their very existence. The universe had tested them with the ultimate challenge, and they had passed. Nothing would ever make them afraid again.